Okay, now we're going to go through another video tutorial from Amazon, which I really like this because this is going to discuss context and session management with Agentcore Runtime. Okay, so once again, I'm in PyCharm. I have a virtual environment for Python. I'm looking at these tutorials, and basically I'm in advanced concepts, and I'm looking at this one, understanding runtime context. Now I obviously ran this already, so some of these files were produced, but let's get into it and let's find out what we're going to learn from this video. Okay, once again, folder, project, a notebook, a Jupyter notebook we're running. It has code in it, has diagrams in it. Really good way to learn Agentcore. So let's get to it. Okay, so understanding the runtime context and session management in Agentcore Runtime. Okay, so keep in mind that a user is trying to talk to an agent, an AI agent, and you might want to save the context, like the whole conversation you're having with the user. And so when I say context, it could mean one or two things: either a context during one request, a context over the whole multiple requests. And so we introduced this session management. So with a session ID, a user could be talking with a session ID. It runs in its own micro VM, and Agentcore Runtime runs that in its own VM and isolates it from other users and other session IDs. So this is like this context and session management works hand in hand. So the bottom line is, this particular demo demonstrates how Agentcore Runtime handles sessions and maintains context across multiple invocations. How agents can access runtime information through the context object. Okay, so that's important to understand. Now, it goes on to say that maintaining context and state across multiple invocations, and you want to ensure that the security isolation between different users. Now, I'm going to add also for a single user. If I'm a single user and I have one session, I have another session ID, we're isolating those two sessions as well. Okay, so the tutorial details. Context and session management is what we're discussing. We have a single agent, it's a strands agent. We have an LLM model, which is Haiku. And the tutorial components are runtime, context, session management, Agentcore Runtime, strands agent, and Amazon Bedrock model. That's just all the high-level components that we're using. And they call this an intermediate complexity. And we're using Boto 3 SDK. Now let's look at the architecture, okay? And I wanna focus on these things because this is critically important, okay? We're gonna explore how Agent Runtime manages sessions and provides context to agents, okay? We're gonna demonstrate how the same session ID maintains context across multiple invocations. Single users, single session ID, you got a context, and you're talking to an agent, and basically we're maintaining this context so it remembers our conversation. That's it. Context object, how agents can access runtime information through a context parameter. In particular, we can get the session ID from the context parameter once we start talking to the agent, okay? How different session IDs create completely isolated environments. So the main importance here is session isolation. You don't want the micro VM for a particular session ID uses its own memory, its CPU, its file system, and it's isolated. It doesn't clash with anything else. No one else's session, okay? So the session ID provides that isolation. Payload flexibility, how to pass custom data to agents through the payload. Okay, so this is the architecture that we're talking about. We're talking about the user asking a question to Agentcore Runtime. We're in the cloud. We have an endpoint. We're talking to the agent. The agent is talking to tools and using tools to answer questions, and we're using an LLM model to process outputs. So this architecture diagrams are very important. So now the tutorial key features: session-based content management, understanding how agent runtime maintains context with sessions. Okay, and it's pretty straightforward. It's like a web session in some sense. Only the user's chatting and he's talking to the agent in the session. In Agentcore, the session ID is keeping track of the context. Same similarities. Runtime session lifecycle, learning about session creation, maintenance, and then terminating. So when you terminate a session, you lose the context. You could always start it up with a new session ID, but basically you should always terminate the session after you're finished, or else these orphan sessions and context wind up using resources. The context object access, accessing runtime information like the session ID through the context parameter. Okay, so the session ID is inside the context parameter. Session isolation, we're going to demonstrate different sessions providing complete isolation for all different users with different sessions. For a single user with two different sessions, there's isolation. So just keep that in mind. Payload handling, flexible data passing through custom payload structures. And cross invocation state, maintaining agent state across multiple calls within the same session. So this is an important thing. Prerequisites: Bedrock, Agentcore SDK, credentials, Strands agent, Docker running, Python, etc. There's a version of Python. Okay, so now we're going to look at understanding Amazon Bedrock Agentcore Runtime sessions. So how does it manage a session? Okay, it provides complete session isolation. Each session runs in its own micro VM, isolated CPU, its own memory, its own file system. That's the only way to guarantee isolation and security for that particular session. Okay, security boundaries, complete separation between users' sessions prevents data contamination. Determination cleanup: after sessions completed, the micro VM is terminated and memory is sanitized. So it's important to end your session. Okay. Now, session lifecycle. What's the session lifecycle? You create it with the unique runtime session ID. You process requests and maintain a context. Session waits for next invocation while preserving the context. This is an important line here. The session waits for the next invocation while preserving the context. Termination: session ends due to inactivity, maximum lifetime, health check failures. So we're going to go through an example later where we change the timeout for one session. So this session lifecycle is configurable. So it's important to configure it based on your business model. And now context persistence, where the session Agentcore Runtime maintains the conversational history, the application state, the variables and objects, the file system, any files modified or created, and environmental variables, the custom settings and configuration. So think of context as someone's chatting with me, I'm an agent, someone's chatting with me, and I could remember what's going on during this chat session. So session management best practices, unique session IDs, context reuse. Use the same session ID for related invocations to maintain the context. Session boundaries, use a different session ID for different users. And imperial nature, don't rely on sessions for permanent data storage. Use the Agentcore memory for persistence. Okay, that's an important concept here because we don't have to store anything. We don't have to go through the work storing anything. Agentcore memory is long-term and short-term, and we can persist what we need to persist. Okay, now, first we're going to do is install the requirements. So let's look at the requirements. It turns out that the requirements are the same as the last project that I just looked at. So force reinstalling then this doesn't make sense. So what I'm going to do is just skip that install. Where are we? Let's see what happens here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is prepare for the agent for deployment on Agentcore Runtime. Okay, so first we're going to access the runtime context. You need the runtime context because you have to get the session information from it. So you need to instantiate a runtime, and you're going to be passing payloads to the agent, and you want to keep track of user interactions within the session. You want to demonstrate session boundaries and show they're isolated. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the context object. Context object is Agentcore Runtime provides valuable information about the current execution environment, session ID, runtime metadata, information about the runtime environment, execution details. Okay, so here's our Strands agent with context handling. So we're writing this file. So let's first, it's going to wind up overwriting this. So let's first write it. And I don't know why this is taking so long. All we're doing is writing a file. Okay, now let's look at the file. Okay. Now it's important to realize we're using Strands here. So from Strands, we import a Strands agent tool. We could annotate with the tools. Down here is an annotation. We have Strands tools. We import a calculator. This is the calculator that's in the Strands tools, so I don't have to create one. And so what happens here is we have a Bedrock Agentcore app. We import from Bedrock Runtime. And we have a Bedrock model. We import from Strands models. Okay, so it seems a little bit confusing at first, but you know, once you realize what's in Strands and what's in Bedrock, and how Strands nicely works with Bedrock, you kind of like the whole situation here. So let's just move forward. So what we do is we instantiate a Bedrock Agentcore app. Okay, and that was imported here. So this is our app that's going to run in the runtime, the Agentcore runtime. We have a tool called the weather tool. We just returned sunny. It's a function. We have a tool called getTime. We returned a time string. We have a model ID we just defined as Haiku from Claude. And we instantiate a Bedrock model because that's what Strands wants. It wants the Bedrock model. And then when we instantiate the Strands agent, because this agent's coming from Strands, we have the model, we have the tools. Notice these are annotated. This is from a Strands library. And then what we do is we give it a system prompt. You are a helpful assistant. You could do simple math calculations. You could tell the weather, provide the current time, blah, blah, blah. Always start by acknowledging the user's name. Now, we have a get user name, and we pass a user ID, and we get back a username, just to show what user's using the system and what user has a session ID. Is it this user or Manny user or Mark? We're going to be talking about different sessions. So given the user ID, we're just returning a user. That's simple. Okay, now here's the app entry point. Here's the endpoint we're going to expose from Agentcore. And what we're going to do is it's going to be defined Strands agent Bedrock handling context. We pass it a payload, and we also pass it this context. Now it's important to get the context because you get the session ID from the context, but let's just move on. Agentcore runtime entry point that demonstrates context handling and session management. Okay, here's our payload. User data, request information. The context contains the session and the execution information. Okay, so when we call this, we get the payload. We get the prompt for the payload. We get the user ID from the user input. Hold on a second. We get the user ID from the payload. We get the username using the user ID. So this user ID is passed into here just to get a username. So we print out the runtime context information, the user ID, username, input, session ID, object type, and we are printing out the context information. And then we create a personalized prompt that includes the context information. Prompt is, my name is username, here is my request. And then the additional context, this is the session ID, context session ID. Please acknowledge my name and provide assistance. Yeah, so this prompt includes everything up to this this session ID stuff. So we pass the Strands agent the prompt and we get a response. And we say, return the response content text. And then we run. Now we just wrote the file. We didn't do anything with it yet. But this is what the file is going to do. It's going to go on to Agentcore. And this is a little blurb. Let's read this because it's very important. The code above demonstrates key concepts of how Agentcore Runtime manages sessions and provides context. The context parameter in your entry function provides access to the runtime information. So here it is right here. That's how you get the session ID. And use the context information in your agent logic. And they're saying the continuity benefits are persistent environment, context preservation, resource reuse, performance benefits. Reduces the cold start times for subsequent invocations. The session isolation guarantees that this session ID runs in a micro VM with isolated resources. No data leakage between different user sessions. Reliability, it doesn't affect others, and during cleanup, it cleans up the session information. Now for payload flexibility, you have a user's question, user ID, preferences, context data. And so that's what the payload might look like. Now we're going to configure the Agentcore runtime deployment. What that does is say, let the developer interact with the tools, the starter kit, the toolkit, and create a Docker file which is going to run and launch inside of Amazon in Agentcore environment. So you're working with this virtually, you're looking at this, and you're using tools to make this happen. So this is the first thing that we need to do. We use the starter toolkit to import a runtime. We use Boto3 to import a session. Create the session. We use the region name. We try to expose the region name. And now we say Agentcore Runtime. We're instantiating a runtime. And now we're configuring it. The way we configure the runtime is we're talking to Agentcore. We're saying, configure a runtime for me. This is the entry point. Create an execution role. Create an ECR registry. Here's the requirements file. Here's the region. Here's the agent name. And I'm going to change this because I'm not cleaning up my resources properly. So I want to make sure that I use a different agent name here. Now let's execute this. So this is configuring the runtime so I can have a runtime which has these parameters that's going to serve as my endpoint. So notice my entry point is the file that we just created. Notice it called my agent, gave my agent a certain name. No container engine found, blah, blah, blah. It's a warning. So it basically uses, we have to create the container, we have to create the registry, and so this, we generated a Docker file. It's right here. We configured Agentcore. Here's a CloudFormation script. And we got a check mark at the end. We're done with this step. Now, launching the context. When we launch the context, what we're doing is we're throwing it over to Amazon account. And when we launch, we're registering the Docker file with the ECR registry. We're running code build to run a pipeline to deploy the Agentcore, the runtime agent to Agentcore using the runtime endpoint. Okay, so once again, still we're not using it, we're just configuring it. Now, we're launching. Let's launch this here, see what happens. Because when we launch, code build is starting to run. And setting up an ECR registry repository with an execution role. The repository doesn't exist. We create one where these identifiers come out with all of this fantastic information. Role creation complete, role created, policy attached. So basically what we're trying to do here is get Agentcore, a runtime deployed into Agentcore so that our endpoint is exposed and it's ready to be crawled. That's basically what we're doing here. And so let's just let it finish. Execution role is available. You know, I got to be careful because I created resources before. I don't want to clash with any existing resources. If I do, I have to clean them up and try it again. So I'm hoping that this runs. Since I changed the name of the agent, the other resources probably changed as well. The other resource names. Have my fingers crossed. So basically what's happening is we have a Docker file. We're pointing to an image, a container. We want that Docker file to run in a container. When it runs, we want this Python script to run, and we want this app endpoint, annotated app endpoint, to expose our endpoint. That's basically what's going on. Now you could read through all of this. You can go to Amazon right now and see that the agent is running in Agentcore. You could do an analysis to see that the role is there and the ECR registry is there, code pipeline ran, etc. But we're just going to check the runtime status by executing this line, this code snippet. It got the status and it's ready. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take the user with an application and invoke the endpoint. Now, invoke it, ask it a question, what's the weather, ask it a question, what's 2 plus 4, ask a question, what's that result plus 6. You know, we're maintaining a session here with this user, so keep that in mind, that's the point of this. Okay, so we're demonstrating session management, session continuity. We use the same session ID for multiple invocations. Session isolation, we demonstrate the complete isolation of sessions, and we show how the agent can access runtime context information. Okay, so now there's going to be another snippet of code here. Okay, so now we're going to create our first session with a user with ID equals 1. And so what we do is we import UUID because that creates random numbers, and I could use them as a session ID here. So that's what we do. We create this session ID, and we give it that session ID. We use the first user ID 1, and the first question about the weather. Okay, we invoke Agentcore Runtime, invoke a prompt. How is the weather outside? User ID equals 1. Okay, this is the second argument, this session ID. So we use the session ID as the second argument. Let's run this. Okay, we got a session ID. We're dealing with Maria. The first question is about the weather. Great news, Maria. Well, I don't know if I'm pronouncing a name right. Maria. Whatever. Is there anything else you'd like to know? It's sunny outside. It's a beautiful day. We call that one tool. Keep asking questions, right? So now the bottom line is we're going to invoke the agent again with the same session ID, with the same user. I'll follow with a math question. Okay, how much is 2 times 5? The answer is 10. Is there anything else you'd like? I'm going to continue with that session. I'm going to say, and that plus 34. Is 44. So the point of this session is that it keeps the context for the user communicating with the agent. And we're using a session ID to map to that context, to keep that context. So we delete the session, we lose the context. If the session expires, we lose the context. Now we're going to go stop the session. Note that the interaction is finished. We stop it using stop runtime session. And here we create an Agentcore client using Boda 3. And then we stop runtime session. We give it the agent ARN and the session ID. And so this is going to stop the session, and we should print out, we stop and release the resources. Okay, and here it is. We stop and release the resources. Now we're going to do something a little bit different. Let's add a new interaction. We're still session 2. Maria's using a new session. Let's try this. And she's using a new session ID. She's using a different random number for a session ID. Okay, and she says n plus 10, and I'd be happy to add 10 to something. However, I need more information. It doesn't remember the context because we're using a different session ID. No context. I can't remember what we're talking about. So Maria switched to a different session ID. Same person can't remember. The agent can't remember what they were talking about. Now, what happens here is we create a different user session for someone by the name of Manny. Manny has a different session ID, different user ID. Same question demonstrates user isolation. Hi, it's Sunny. Okay, it's hard-coded to return Sunny. It's not going to be different for any user no matter how you look at it. But anyway, now you're going to stop both sessions, and you stop the new session ID. So we stop. So the microservices are released. Now what we do is we start a different session. And I think the purpose of this session, stop the different user session to complete the life cycle. Stop runtime session. What did I do up here? Stop runtime session. runtime session. Session 3, this is session 2. Okay, let's stop this session here. Okay, release the microservices.